Time. An unreliable witness, especially in Lumiere. Inside the canvas, time moves differently than it does outside. In Clair Obscur Expedition 33, information about the timelines surrounding the fracture is fragmented and seemingly contradictory. Journals, dialogues, and cutscenes all contain pieces of the puzzle, but their reliability varies from explicit to ambiguous. And crucially, they are not in chronological order. As a result, character relationships in key moments become difficult to place. It becomes difficult to reconcile everything into a single, coherent sequence. In this video, I'm reconstructing the Expedition 33 timeline as rigorously as evidence allows. From the origins of the canvas through Expedition Zero's journey to where we meet Gustave, when main characters' paths crossed and diverged, focusing on what we can say reliably happened, to who and when. Information comes in all manners, both in terms of format and clarity. To make the distinction clear, I'll use different coloured petals in the corner of the screen. Yellow as literal facts, blue meaning high confidence inference, and red for heavier speculation. Naturally, spoilers ahead. Verso Dessendre was born on the 22nd of February 1879. We start getting to know him when he was a young boy. A boy who loves trains, painting, his dogs and most of all music. Learning to paint with his sisters by their mother, with the latter also supporting his piano. Eventually, a painting of his makes the wall. It is at this point that Verso likely begins his first canvas. The one filled with wondrous and bountiful joy, balloons and vibrant colours, gestuals all continuously playing. Even Oscio competes to hold their breath the longest. He's not alone either. At first, it was only young Verso playing with Esquire and his older sister Claire and Francois.
Back in the day, when there was nothing in the world except the four of us flying around on adventures.
Renoir and Aline also played there alongside Monoko.
When we could play with Claire, Aline and Renoir.
Alicia does not appear to have spent much time in the canvas initially. Monoko recognises her upon meeting her, but he never reflects on them playing together like he does with the rest of the family. Even Esquire doesn't appear to recognise Maëlle as clearly as he does CL, but then he might be operating under the old same but different logic. At some point, Alicia does start joining in though. She experiences deja vu in Esquire's nest, gets on wells with the gestuals like she understands them better, and appears to recognise Goblu. The duration of this period remains unclear. Claire is the first to leave the canvas permanently, a loss young Verso quietly mourns when he speaks of her finding other friends. After this, Verso presumably begins spending increasingly long periods outside the canvas. Probably here is where Esquire and Oscio hold their breaths for 6,000 and 5,000 years respectively. Beyond this though, details about Verso's interaction with the canvas into adulthood are undocumented. In fact, the next significant milestone we know about is the fire. Verso died on 23rd of December 1905 in a house fire set by the writers when Alicia tried to broker peace between the warring factions. The family collapses under the weight of their grief. Claire retaliating, Alicia withdrawing while recovering from her own injuries, Aline pulling away entirely while Renoir fails to keep the family together. Originally, Aline only spent small amounts of time in Verso's canvas to get some reprieve from the pain.
But this is the first time I've felt any surcease. For a few moments a day, my heart beats again.
Each trip getting longer and longer, eventually becoming enough for Renoir.
She's left us all behind to drown by ourselves so that she can drown alone.
We don't know how much time passes between Verso's death and the creation of Lumiere. In those early days, Aline may have just spent time in the Gestual Village or Sacred River for all we know. Perhaps maybe only the void itself, being with young Verso, even giving him a new train to play with. Eventually, Aileen creates Lumiere and the painted mirrored versions of her family. Immortal, unable to experience death, but still given the pain and scars of those they resemble.
The pain of losing you, she made me inherited.
We know that 100 years passed before the fracture, before Renoir entered the canvas to extract Aileen.
Correct? That still annoys me. They left in year 100. They should be called Expedition 100. Makes no sense.
100 years old, when their argument causes half the city to be ripped and thrown away, a world destroyed. One lovingly created by Verso and his sisters. Upon the monolith, a luminous 100 appears alongside a titan, the Paintress. Records are sparse in this period up until monolith year 70. We rely on infrequent recollections and a few journals. Despite this, we can identify and track several key events. Expedition Zero was the first of its kind to search for survivors. We know there were several of these search and rescue operations.
Those early expeditions, they were search and rescue.
Possibly operating all under the Expedition Zero banner. Given that there are no journal entries between monolith year 100 and 84, we can equally assume that there were either multiple expeditions in year 100 or that there were several over that decade. We know they stopped at some point, as Expedition 84's journal states that they reinstated them, but the why is elusive. It appears it's down to an issue about trusting Verso, an all too common problem. Thanks to the iconic armbands, we know that there were several members of Expedition Zero. Verso, Julie, Simon, Claude, Louise and Dion among many unnamed. We do not know for certain if Alicia and Claire were alongside them. Neither have an armband. But then neither does Renoir, who we know was also there. However, what becomes increasingly clearer is that this was at least two different parties. One group reaches the monolith and encounters Clair Dessendre, who tried to diplomatically kill them all after diplomatically asking them to leave.
Yeah. Then tried to kill us so we wouldn't go home.
This revealed the painted family's immortality, much to Claire's annoyance. However, at least Julie, Claude, Louise and Dion were not there, as in the future they abduct the presumed traitor Verso. This abduction likely happened in the year 100. Although we know that Verso returned to Lumiere to help with the rebuild and create the dome shield that protects Lumiere. Therefore, there must have been multiple search and rescue expeditions. The most coherent reconstruction is that Expedition Zero splits into separate groups. One group obliterated at the monolith, witnessed by Julie and her crew.
That attack destroyed half his torso. There's no walking away from that.
They return to Lumiere to share the news that the Paintress is not the problem, which Julie remains unconvinced by.
He and his father keep saying the Paintress is the solution, not the problem. But I don't buy it anymore.
A second search party happens where they abduct Verso.
Guess they thought I knew more than I did. Halfway to the monolith, I was betrayed. Barely escaped.
Ultimately, they fall to his sword, under the shadow of the monolith, outside of the city, where he is consoled by his sister Alicia. Whether or not Verso and his family returned to Lumiere after this is unclear. We know he didn't return when he felt he wasn't trusted. Undoubtedly, other Lumiereans may have had similar conclusions to Julie, especially if Julie's crew didn't return with him. Eventually, the expeditions halted, until the Gamages failed to cease and action needed to be taken. There is another unresolved thread from this time: the abduction of Painted Claire and Simon's revenge. Two things are for sure: Simon was not slaughtered with the rest of Expedition Zero at the barrier, and he was not around Painted Claire at the time of her abduction either, or he wouldn't have been fooled by Clair Dessendre.
What did she do to you? That Paintress. She fooled me. She looked so much like you and I believed her story.
We can confirm that she was taken at some point before Verso wrote his journal, which is a confession of sorts to Julie after her death in year 100.
Clair already took our sister.
Once Simon is granted overwhelming power, he kills the Hauler, ascends the monolith to confront Aileen, only to find that the only way to save Painted Clair and Lumiere was to destroy Renoir. He failed in that quest, and Renoir overpowered him, but we will come back to this story later, as it will help address one of the more common plot holes. From Monolith Year 70 onward, we begin to see annual journal entries as efforts to stop the Paintress intensify. A key caveat before we continue: a journal may reference something for the first time, but it does not mean that it is the first time that event happened. For example, a journal may reference axons for the first time, but that doesn't mean the axons were created in that year. Nor do journals always reflect their last few moments or days. We know some may have been months before they actually gamage. It's Expedition 70 though that presents a potential major problem with the timeline. How did they get inside the monolith without felling any axons? The answer is, there was no barrier during Expedition 70's journey, and there are a few clues that can help clarify this. Let's go back to Simon as promised. Simon is granted the power to fell the axons and then go to the monolith. Strange then that he only killed one axon, not two like Expedition 33 needs to. He also makes no mention of the curator, a barrier, axon hearts, nothing at all. You could say he might have had enough power from Clair that he only needed one axon to break the barrier, but then why wouldn't Clair just give him all the power in the first place to break the barrier? The evidence we have about Clair's personality suggests why Simon targeted the Hauler. Clair wanted him to put down the axon that represented her because of the same reason she traps Painted Clair. She despises copies of herself. I argue that the barrier we know and love was erected after Expedition 70, when the Painted family was scared about the progression of the expeditions and took action, as Lune says.
This looks similar to Lumiere's shield dome. Maybe we can just cross it.
At minimum, this confirms that Aileen taught Renoir and Verso how to make barriers. I know Verso says he was met at the barrier by Clair. This statement though allows for multiple interpretations. One, he literally means the barrier we are all familiar with at the base of the monolith. Two, he is using the barrier as a reference point, but the barrier didn't exist yet. Or three, the barrier was somewhere else in the monolith, in maybe a smaller, more primitive form. There are arguments for all three. For example, we know Expedition 0 reached the top of the monolith given we found their flags before the Paintress herself. Just before Expedition 33 fights the Paintress, she encloses them all in a barrier like the one Mael gets trapped in, which is an argument for Explanation 3. Several mysteries still remain. Verso and Renoir parted ways at some point, but we don't know when. It was probably before Expedition 66 though. We know this because those that died eating mushrooms were with Esquier and his immortal friend, who wouldn't be there if he was still with his immortal dad. This mushroom lore informs us that the attempts to take down the axons by Renoir and Verso, as per the 58's journal, must have also happened before Expedition 66. As Verso mentions, he has had a few encounters with them, but also that Visages is weaker due to previous expeditions.
I've had a few rough encounters with the axons. It's already been weakened by previous expeditions, right?
Whether you believe he is referring to pre-Expedition 66 with Renoir or joining with post-66 expeditions is for you to determine. However, no other journals mention Verso, and it's hard to truly know how far some of those expeditions really got. There are some interesting journals that help us track the movement of our Painted family. Expedition 64 note that someone is interfering with their radio frequencies, the ones that no one has used since the fracture. Highly indicative of at least Renoir, but not necessarily Verso. Also, the 56's trapped Alicia. While it's highly likely they were killed by Renoir, again we don't know for certain if Verso was with them. Aside from that, expeditions come and go, giving us information about the philosophy of that team or the area they're in. few tell us about any key characters or events, well, apart from Expedition 60, but I'm certain you know all there is to know about them already.
Bare naked muscles will save the world.
Expedition 40 make it the closest to the monolith, but their gliders gomage away at the barrier and they take up fishing instead. The 37's journal also confirms that they encountered Renoir and they met a similar fate to our own Expedition 33. Let's now then move on to the details we can track about our own expeditioners. Gustave, Lune and Ciel are born in Monolith year 65, with Sophie and Pierre born in the year prior. We can confirm Sophie's age by just reliving the trauma of the prologue. However, Pierre, Ciel's husband, is a little trickier to deduce. First though, let's talk about Verso some more. Verso met Clair for the third time in Monolith year 49, when Maëlle was born to the canvas.
Told me to keep an eye on you.
These few years can explain how Monoko could recognise Maëlle, but not recall playing with her in the early days of the canvas. This is because Verso and Monoko part ways when she was 6, and Monoko goes on to establish Monoko Station for the sake of the Grandis.
When I left you 10 years ago, I convinced myself that it was for the Grandis' sake.
3 years later, Lune and Ciel meet for the first time on the eve of their parents' gamage, but the really tragic events started 6 years later. Ciel, Gustave and Sophie all worked on Aquafarm 3.
I would never abandon a member of Aquafarm 3.
Aquafarm 3.
Aquafarm 3.
That was so long ago. You and Sophie were inseparable on that project.
That Ciel left that project to become a teacher soon after the loss of her husband, who died prematurely in Monolith year 38, 5 years earlier than they planned for. We also know that after Ciel's attempt on her own life, she lost her child, who would have been 6. Pierre should have gomaged when Sophie does, holding the hand of his daughter. It is shortly after the loss of Pierre that Sophie and Gustave separated, breaking up 4 years before Sophie's gamage.
After 4 years apart, what do I say to her on the day of her gamage?
Perhaps the events of one spurred conversations that led to the other. Which brings us to throwing rocks from the Hanging Gardens, Maëlle's favourite place. I hope this reconstruction resembles something coherent and answers a few of your own questions. There are still gaps, but I felt they were either too vague or did not really add anything to the movements of Verso's two families. For example, I have no idea when the second time Verso met Clair is, or how she tried to recruit him, but I feel it must be relevant enough to have been brought up. Also, the Survivor's Journal detailing the Siege of Old Lumiere holds interesting details, but holds little weight to the movement of our main characters and key events in the story. In any case, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with me. If you enjoyed, please remember to like and subscribe, and feel free to pull me up on anything in the comments below. Challenging the timeline is how the story gets clearer. I have other Expedition 33 lore videos on my channel where I've explored different colour systems used within the game and what they could mean, along with some character analysis. Thank you again for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.